So before we begin, I would like to just acknowledge that all the lands where the SFU campuses sit on Coast Salish territories, that of Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, Catesy, Squamish Nation, Coquitlam, and I know that there are others. I call them all my Coast Salish cousins because I'm related to them linguistically, I have found. And I actually have a niece at Squamish Nation. So I have family in one of the host nations. So I'm really happy that we're able to be here today on these lands, and just to give thanks to the spirits and the peoples of these lands as they sit with us in this conversation. So welcome, Tiara. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited to have a conversation with you. Now, tell me about your Indigenous identity, your Black Indigenous identity.
Yes, definitely. First, if you allow me to, I wanted to introduce myself in my native language, just to make sure that I ground the space with my ancestors as well. So, Halito Pachioke, Sahat Shifayat Tiara Cash, Lusa Maliki, Micha Chahta, Micha Cherokee descendant, Sia Hoke, Memphis, Tennessee, Amitali, Coquitlam, Atali, PhD at Simon Fraser, Ataskolili. So thank you so much, Dr. Dorothy, for giving me the space to be able to have this conversation with you today, and to be allowed to share this story. So my name is Tiara Cash. I am Black American, Choctaw, and Cherokee descendant, originally from Memphis, Tennessee, but my lineages, they stretch to the Chahta homelands in Mississippi and the Tsalagi homelands in North Carolina. And so to give you some background on my Black Indigenous heritage and kind of what that means and what's situated in this story. My grandfather was Indigenous. We call the way that we're Indigenous Black Native in the United States. So I'll probably be using that term a bit and wanted to make sure that I explain what that means. But his parents were also Black Native from Mississippi. My matriarchal lineages are Chahta and Tsalagi, and my patriarchal lineages are Chahta. And my family is actually, it's a history that's congruent with a lot others in this small community. So there's not many of us in the United States, but there is a small community of us, of people who were reclassified or even, first classified as either Black or white at this time in the United States. The US wanted more laboring bodies for assimilation. And one way that they did that was that any Indigenous person that had any Black heritage or relatives that were even Black were reclassified and lost the identity that they knew of themselves and to themselves. And so this is one of the reasons why, like, talking about my history and reclaiming my history has been such a journey, because it means that I have to acknowledge the ways that the United States actually created division within my own bloodlines and people. And one part that I really have to sit with too, we talked a little bit about this before, but it was really important. This was an important standing in the way that I saw myself, and I had to start reconnecting. But one of my uncles in my community told me when I was 10 that because I didn't know my language and I wasn't connected to community in the way that, most of my Indigenous family was, that I shouldn't say that I'm Indigenous. And it's something that stuck with me, but something that also helped me to reclaim a lot of what my ancestors were missing. So it helped me to reach out and to start learning my language. It helped me to get in touch with my community. I'm now connected to my community, and have had
So
the
great. I mean, so it was like a gift
it was.
that he gave you.
It was. It was definitely, and it's crazy because at the time, when you're 10, you don't really understand. You feel like there's this piece of you that's kind of been taken away, but actually it was a piece of me that was given. It was definitely a gift. And I actually found out that this uncle passed.
Oh,
Yeah, this earlier this year actually. So it's been sitting really heavy on my heart that I never really got a chance to reach out and really thank him for this gift, but I was able to thank his daughter. So it's just really been a beautiful journey coming back to it.
yeah, and I mean, and you can always go out and put tobacco down and talk to his spirit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like we're not disconnected even when our people pass, and we know that, right?
Definitely.
So talk a little bit more about the complexities of being Choctaw and Cherokee and how that comes about in your community. Because I know that a lot of people here in Canada will be ignorant of that.
Yeah.
And as you know, Indigenous identity right now is a really sensitive topic
Yes. Yes.
because we have pretendians who are desperately wanting to claim indigeneity,
Yes.
mostly because of financial benefits,
Right.
and so that makes it really difficult for those of us who have some pretty harsh lived experience
Yeah.
as Indigenous peoples. So
Yeah.
tell me about Choctaw and Cherokee.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, this is going to be a very hard conversation to get to and to talk about, to be quite honest. But I hope that this education helps because I think it is really an important topic that we don't get to talk about much, really outside of the southeast of the United States, because this is where a lot of this history was. So to be Black Native from these particular tribes, and I'm going to name these five tribes that were called the five civilized tribes, partially because they were a little bit more assimilated into the ways that the Europeans took over the United States. And in one of those ways, it meant owning enslaved people. So this is one of the ways that, we're talking about civilization. This is one of the reasons why they're called the five civilized tribes, but it includes the Chahta, the Tsalagi, the Muskogee, the Seminole, and the Chickasha nations. And so I'm actually connected to many people in all of these communities because we have similar histories where before um, really this staunch division happened between our identities. We were mixed people. We were of mixed lineages. We mixed with each other. Specifically, when we're talking about the Cherokee people, there's people of Cherokee descent that are both that also have African descent. They have Asian descent, right? We were people who traded with each other, who found ways to connect in different ways, and so there's a lot of mixed history and mixed ancestry within these communities, but there's also a lot of division because of the way, again, that the United States came in and tried to create these laboring bodies at the same time that they were actually trying to make sure that they disenfranchised a lot of the indigenous peoples from their lands. So if we think about a lot of the tribes, these five tribes, the homelands that they now have, the nations are centered in Oklahoma, which in the Chahta language means red people. Um, and this is where the Trail of Tears happened. So if we're thinking about the Trail of Tears, it's basically these five civilized tribes, again, I'm putting this in quotes, that were forced off of their homelands in the southeast of the United States and were made, pushed, and disenfranchised to Oklahoma. During that time, two things happened. Either they were able to take some enslaved folks with them and were reclassified again as this Indian, or if there was folks who had mixed heritage and they wanted to stay in these homelands, many of them had to move away from their indigenous heritage and again reclassify as Black or white. And so that is the history of my people. We stayed in these homelands. My people grew up in Mississippi and in North Carolina. We have heritage in both of these particular in the Choctaw and Tsalagi nations. But it meant that there was some complexities in the way that we could claim this. It also meant that I'm not enrolled, so I'm a non-enrolled person, strictly because of these, again, these disenfranchisements, these divisions that were happening. And so a lot of us, and again, this is a small community, so I don't want to sit here and make it seem like there are many people who have this particular heritage. There aren't. But a lot of us are trying now to reconnect on behalf of our ancestors or on behalf of what we knew. I knew I was Indigenous my whole life. This is something that's been passed down through word of mouth to, people. My mom told me, her father told her, and of course, like I said, since he was Indigenous, his mother and father told him as well. And so these are things that we knew, but it also meant that we couldn't necessarily talk or claim these ways that, of knowing and being, because of the United States government and the ways in which they made sure that we couldn't, putting it that way.
Well, the colonial state has not been kind to either Indigenous people or Black people.
Right.
So up here
Right.
in Canada, we have a fairly large Black population in the Atlantic provinces that goes back to the 1700s.
Yeah.
Because Black people from Africa came up through Canada during the time of enslavement, and they were trying to get back to their home country. And there's actually a book, it's called The Book of Negroes.
Oh, yes.
Yes, and it was
So
a
good.
woman who knew how to read and write. She was Muslim, and she actually kept the records of the slave traders because she could write, and she identified people by name,
Right.
their ages. So they weren't just Black child aged 10 or,
Right.
Black male aged 20 or whatever. It's like it's caused a different kind of history, I
Yes.
think, in the Atlantic provinces than we have in the rest of Canada.
Yeah.
I was invited there way back in 2010 when I was in my PhD program to do a keynote address out there at a university. And that was the first time I became aware, because the woman who invited me was a Black woman, originally from Texas, but now Canadian.
Yeah.
And she was in the Nancy's chair of that university. So it's a feminist university.
Okay.
And I remember asking her to please be sure that there was a Mi'kmaq elder my talk, because I wanted to gift the people, from my territory to their territory.
Yes.
And it was interesting reaction, because I gathered that they didn't do that in those lands. Yeah, and there's a lot of intermarriage between the Black population and the Mi'kmaq, of
Yes.
course, over generations. But it has evolved in a problematic way, where I've heard Black women feminists from that region say that they don't identify as settlers, and I had to challenge that, because I said, no matter how you got here, you're still a settler, because they were saying that they were stolen and brought here, right? Which is very correct, I mean,
Yes.
that's what their experience is. But I just reminded them, so maybe rename yourself as stolen settlers or
Yeah.
something,
We
right?
usually say stolen guests. That's usually what I usually, but I'm saying that from a position of the fact that I'm also Indigenous, and
Right.
also from the position that I do work with people who are specifically from the nations that are here.
Yeah.
So for me, that's how I usually, identify myself in that particular sense.
Yeah.
But that history is complicated.
It is
right?
very complicated. So that's why I'm really happy that we're having this conversation,
Yeah,
because it'll help to enlighten some people who are
yeah,
totally ignorant of that history, which
yeah,
is deeply embedded in the colonial state
yes,
and, totally erased, by the
yes,
colonial state.
absolutely.
So, I mean, it's our time to bring it forward, right? And I'm glad that you were agreeable to do that, in this conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah. So tell me, where are your mom and dad, and do you have siblings? Do you have
Yes.
children?
I do not have any children, but I do have a sister and a brother. And my mom and dad are in Arizona right now. So they are where my grandmother is. Like I said, I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. That's where I was born and raised. But then after high school, we all moved to Arizona because that's where my maternal grandmother is from. And she's
Okay.
also of mixed heritage, but her mixed heritage is basically Black and white. So there's some complexities there as well because she's from the South. All of my family is from the South, and so there's just a lot of complexities with identity when it comes to the ways in which we see ourselves when generations and generations and generations of people are from this particular place that has so much history that has not been kind, like you said, to Black or Indigenous folks, and where there is also a lot of history of forced European ancestry on a lot of
Yes.
Black and Indigenous folks as well. So
Yes.
there's interesting pieces there. I also am gonna like throw this book in here. It's called Indivisible,
Uh-huh.
but it's a book that is by the um, National Museum of the American Indian, Smithsonian, and it talks about the histories that we were just talking about. So if anyone here is like really interested in learning more about Black natives or what they call African Native Americans, this history gives a lot of information about that as well. And everything that I said is like talked about in a way that is scholarly, particularly in this book. So it's a really good way to gain more understanding in history.
Yeah, that's great. Now tell me about your academic genealogy. Where
Yes.
where did you start your academic path?
So this is a really great question. So to give first, I want to start by saying that like my academic path leading me here was very different than what I expected it to be. So my mom was a collegiate coach my entire life growing up. And for the longest, I thought I was going to work in athletics.
Uh-huh.
So my undergraduate degree is in exercise and wellness.
Uh-huh.
My first master's is in kinesiology with a concentration in sports psychology because I wanted to move into that realm. And then when I came here to SFU, I finished my second master's and I'm now doing a PhD in social psychology. So it evolved from this idea of me working in athletics, specifically to me utilizing a lot of the things that I had found over my lifetime, both through experience and through conversations with people who have had difficult life transitions, um, for me to study what I study now, which is life transitions and utilizing pro-sociality to boost well-being or to boost happiness, to boost flourishing and thriving, and to decrease anxiety and depression. And specifically, again, the way that I look at pro-sociality or giving back to others
Mhm.
is to help them through these difficult transitions. So this can be transitions to university, it can be student athletes who are transitioning out of university, it can be parenthood, it can be people who are moving to a new country, right? Anytime we have any difficult transition, it's what I study, and it's me thinking about how people give back as ways to make themselves happy as well.
Mhm. Before we get into your PhD, tell me what your second master's was in.
The first or the second master's was in the same thing, was in student athlete, was in social psychology where I studied transitions.
Oh, okay. So you did your first one in kinesiology, which is a very science-based, and then you went into social psychology.
Yes.
So what does social psychology mean?
Good. Yeah, I love that question. Uh, so it is the study of psychology, but it's from the perspective of looking at people as they engage within social groups. So it's
Okay.
not quite sociology. Sociology is looking at social groups only. We look at people, individual people, their experiences, but we don't take away from the fact that they are people inside of a social group, right? Like everyone who walks on the earth has some sort of connection to some social group that helps to influence who they are as a person. And so that's basically what social psychology is. It looks at relationships, it looks at uh, personalities, and looking at the way that social relationships shape those particular things.
So it's human based.
It's human
So
based.
it can be looking at the individual within a collective, within a group.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that really now talk to me a bit about your mindfulness,
Yes.
about that whole concept. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So I came into understanding mindfulness through I'll say through my parents and through my lineages as well, but I started practicing when I was about 10 years old. So this has been something that has been a part of my life for a very long time. Spiritually and, functionally. I didn't realize that people were like, you could have jobs around this, or that other people were doing this as well, until I finished with my first master's and got a position at Arizona State University, where I worked in the College of Nursing and Health Innovation as their program manager for the Center for Mindfulness. So
Mm,
that's basically what started this this idea of me utilizing mindful practices as a way to talk about relationships with humans and relationships with the collective. And by the collective, I mean all of our relations, right?
mhm,
So for me, mindfulness is simply being in the moment and being aware of what is happening in those moments, but it's really intently a way for us to connect to everything. Like that's the way that I perceive mindfulness. And the interesting piece about that was when I was working in higher education, with this mindfulness background, I recognized that many other people in this like secular way that they thought about mindfulness did not see mindfulness that way. There was this huge disconnection between understanding that being in the moment and understanding that, really utilizing these tools for self preservation and self well being was really also a way for us to connect outside of ourselves that was missing.
mhm.
And I didn't like that. So one of the things that I worked on while I was at Arizona State University, and I work on now, is this concept of equitable mindfulness. And it's just a word that basically means exactly what we talked about, where we are looking at utilizing the tools of mindfulness. And by tools, I mean, again, practices where we can be really intently present in these particular moments. And they can be cultural practices, they can be practices that are social, but we utilize those practices to connect further out with
Mm.
other people, with our community, with broader humanity, with all of our relatives. And that's the way that I consider mindfulness. So when I talk to people about it, when I go on presentations or do keynotes, this is always the lens that I'm coming from
Uh-huh.
when I'm discussing it.
So how did you come to be at SFU?
Yeah.
What brought you here?
Well, what really brought me here were two things. The first is kind of out there. And I'll say that the first is more of just like a calling. Like I recognized that I was really done with gracefully, I should say, done with the experiences that I was having in Arizona. I was grateful for the time that I was having. I was grateful for everything that I learned, but that I really wanted to move on and to start doing something bigger that I thought really gave back to the way that I saw the world, and that I could live my own dream. And for some reason, Vancouver specifically was like calling me. So I was like, all right, this is interesting. I'm keeping that in the back of my mind. But then when I started looking for PhD programs, because I wanted to go back and get a PhD, as I was thinking about expanding this equitable mindfulness framework and expanding my work that I do in Crown Vita, I saw Dr. Lyra Agnon, who is my supervisor now, and the work that she was doing on happiness and well-being and giving back to others, which are all these important aspects of the way that I consider mindfulness. And so I reached out and we immediately were in touch and felt these connections. And so I realized that I really wanted to come and to study here so that I could be under her tutelage. And that's really why I came. So I'm here studying with Dr. Agnon, working on, ideas and concepts of gratitude and happiness and well-being, and utilizing a lot of these ideas to help with the work, again, that I'm doing with Crown Vita, my organization, and talking about mindfulness and in talking about how we can see these tools as being more, again, equitable. But when I'm saying that, I'm really focusing on this collective. So for me, equitable is a synonym, I guess you can say, for like collective understanding or collective relationships.
Hmm,
That's why I came to SFU.
okay. Well, that's good to know. I mean, because people come here in such different ways, right? The
Yeah.
pathway to get here is very different, and I remember in our uh, first conversation, you talked a little bit about how much easier it was to be up here.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. So I think, so first of all, one of the reasons why I think it's easier to be up here is because I feel as if I have been accepted for every identity that I bring into the world. And that is a new position for me. It is a new space for me to be in. Growing up in the South, there are many identities that I see myself as, right? Being Black, Indigenous, queer, neurodivergent, so forth and so on, that aren't accepted, that are not easily and readily able to be accessed by my actual self in those
Mm-hmm.
spaces. And coming up here, I found that it was the complete opposite. People accepted me for being Black. People accepted me for being Indigenous. People accepted me for being queer and neurodivergent. And it was the first time in my life that I felt that. And it also meant, and I think that this is really important too, is especially as we're talking about these ideas of people trying to usurp identities. Um, it also meant that I could engage in giving back and doing work for these identities. And I think that that's what's really important is that if you are, and you don't necessarily need to do work when you are an identity or you claim an identity. But if you're really thinking about being this person in the world, like if I'm thinking about being Indigenous and I am really taking time to nurture that identity, then that also for me means that I need to give back. It means that I need to connect with some folks from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation and work on land defending. It means that I need to work with the FNMISA and do some group work to make sure that Indigenous graduate students and Indigenous um, undergraduate students are having the opportunity to thrive and expand. Like these are things that I think are important. And so being accepted here for who I am and all of myself meant that I could also give back in a way that I had never been able to either.
That's so great because giving back, as you know, is a core, I think it's in our genes,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
I've in every job I've ever had, I've always said that, right? It's got to be giving back to my people
That's
somehow,
it.
for all of the privileges that I've had in
Yeah.
my life. One of them being able to study and become a person who carries this title of PhD.
Mm.
If it wasn't for my grandmothers and my mother and all the women before me that sacrificed,
Yeah.
right? I wouldn't be here.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
sometimes think about, I wonder what they would think
Yeah.
if they saw me right now. But this whole notion of reciprocity, of giving back, is a core value, right?
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
and that leads me to my next question. How much of your research is going to be including Indigenous knowledges?
Yes. Well, I am trying to come first from a framework that includes Indigenous knowledges because I think I don't want to ever be someone who extracts, which is the opposite of who we are. We don't extract at all. Our work and like you said in our DNA is always about reciprocity.
Mhm.
So it's not just about me, taking knowledge from people or from experiences. It's about me working together to see what knowledges come through. But also in that, making sure that I am intently aware that I am giving back through this knowledge that is being cultivated. I think that that's number one and that's most important. But I'm also, as much as possible, having conversations with uncles and aunties and elders and folks who I am connected with here around this work and around giving back, because that is like the core point to my research is giving back to other people. What does that look like to us? What does that feel like to us? How do we do this work so effortlessly in a way that is not really reflected in a lot of the colonial institutional ways.
Mhm.
And I want to have that framework, that lens as a way that I do this research, but also again in a way that is acknowledging that this is a part of this and not in a way that is extracting this language and then saying, okay, and now let's move this into science or let's publish this work and that's the end of it. So all that to say, I'm working on it.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think it's really important to the core of the work that I'm doing and the research that I'm doing is
Well, I
making sure.
think that, well, that's really good to know,
Yeah.
and I think I told you that I was organizing two webinars that are going to be available here at SFU
Yes.
on Indigenous knowledges, right?
Yes.
One is going to be about Indigenous knowledge in the community, because I really think that people have a misconception that Indigenous knowledge only exists on the reservations, right?
Mm,
Within those boundaries. And of
yes.
course, that's not true.
Right.
And then the other webinar is going to be about Indigenous knowledges and languages in
Mm.
the academy, so yeah.
Phew.
So it's like people are beginning to realize, I mean, when you look out into the world in terms of climate change
Uh-huh.
and the processes that are working, that are actually going to be able to make a difference to the waters and the lands and the
Yes.
trees and all the beings that live on there. it comes out of Indigenous knowledges
Yes.
and
Yes.
ways of practicing interrelationship
Yes.
comes out of Indigenous knowledges, right?
Yes.
So yeah, so I'm really, really happy to hear that. And I know that it can be very difficult to talk about Indigenous knowledges in the institution.
Yes.
But the way that my boss and I here at graduate and postdoctoral studies, we talk about it in every meeting that we can, that Indigenous students are bringing a gift to the university, right? To the academic institution, and it's happening right across the country.
Yes.
So yeah. So I'm really, really happy to hear that. Do you have anything else that you would like to talk about?
No, I think we've hit, you know, everything. I just would really, I mean, and this goes back to both my research and also, and again, with reconnecting, I would just like to make sure that I reiterate the importance of giving back to our communities. I just think that that's so important. And in everything that we do, making sure that that is something that's at the forefront of our minds as we do this work. Because
What stage are you at in your PhD process?
comps.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I'm
So
currently in
getting
comps.
ready to write comprehensive.
Yes.
So then your research proposal comes after
Yes.
that. Yeah.
I'm really excited. I'm really
Yeah,
excited.
that's really good. Well, I do know that you've been giving back here on these lands, because I hear through friends of mine that you've been up on Burnaby Mountain at the watch house.
Yes.
So it's good to hear that, because I have this personal utopian dream
I love
that
this.
that if we all became mindful and take care of the lands where we are living, and we work together in that, then Mother Earth might have a chance.
I love that. Listen, I'm right
That's
there in that dream.
my utopian dream. So yeah, so thank you for doing your part, and thank you so much for being a part of the conversations. I know that you will add some elements to this conversation that people are not accustomed to hearing.
Yes.
So we're all about bringing things forward to get people thinking about things.
Yes.
So thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dorothy. I really appreciate it.